Greetings, family. Mm-mm-mm. It's morning time. We're breathing. The sister just spoke about the blessings of making it here without the rain inundating us and messing our hair up if you're a woman who's about the business of keeping the hair straight. Like, we really have a lot to be grateful for. We just had a moment of silence for those who are in the struggle and some whose breath, the last breath was breathed maybe a second ago as a result of domestic violence. So when I say greetings, family, I expect a reverberation of energy around us being alive and connected in family and community. So greetings, family. Greetings. So as the sister said, my name is Shawnee Benton Gibson. I am 51 and here for a life of fun and elevation and transformation. I'm grateful that I get to be with you today because this is one of the demonstrations that I'm living my life on purpose and with intention. I'm grateful also because I get to stand before you in memory of my daughter who I just lost. Today is the 23rd. She passed on October 6th. And she passed as a result of complications connected to giving birth, which is one of the most natural things a woman can do. But with Black and brown women, it ceases to be natural. That you can go in feeling labor pains, having experienced your water breaking, and you might not make it out. You might not make it out whole and complete. You might make it out breathing, but you may have gone through a traumatic experience as a result of a comorbidity, diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, just stress and strain, depression. Your baby might not make it out. You and your baby might not make it out. And while I know today's subject matter is about domestic violence, I'm a firm believer that my lineage, and for those who identify as Black and brown or people of color, that part of our lineage, part of the epigenetics, part of the abuse, the neglect, part of being stolen away, that it creates things in our lives and experiences in our lives that make it hard for us just to breathe and be. And that creates a space for us to attract relationships and connections with people, whether they be family, friends, lovers, that don't serve us, and create dangerous spaces and places for us to dwell. And so my daughter is connected to this story. In our family, we experienced domestic violence. She did not, but I did. And as a result, my womb space infected with that energy, the intergenerational aspect of domestic violence and oppression, and just all the stuff that comes with being a Black woman, Black person in this society. I believe her womb, her experience was impacted as a result of that because we pass it down if it does not get addressed. So I speak the name of my daughter, Shawnee Benton Gibson, this morning because she stands with me. And because this subject matter, perfect as it is, I was asked way before she passed to do this. Wanda Best invited me to do this. This was way before Shawnee passed. However, Spirit knew what the subject matter needed to be because Spirit knew what was coming for me and for her. And so it's no accident that I'm talking about life after domestic violence, because now I'm also talking about life after loss of my child. And I'm gonna focus on signs of life, because I've been inundated with signs of her life since she passed. She makes sure she nudges me every day. So before I got here, she nudged me. She shows up in signs of numbers and images and me ear hustling on the train, hearing someone else's conversation, but words from her are coming through another person's body. So I'm a living testimony that there are signs of life after death. And I consider domestic violence to be a form of death, of spirit, of emotional homeostasis, of our well-being, of our personhood. So this conversation is the same conversation, right? So before I dive deeply into this piece about life after domestic violence and life after loss, I want to first honor the ancestors. I want to pay homage to those whose lives were lost on this land and who had ownership of this land before it was stolen away. It's a disservice when we don't acknowledge that. So I speak the names of some of my ancestors, one of which is my daughter right now, my grandmother, my grandmothers, my father, Kenneth, who died when he was 19 and I was 3 years old, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Shirley Chisholm, just Maya Angelou, just the ancestors, but also those whose names we do not know. Some of the women who may have died at the hands of their mates exploits with the hands of their oppressors, whose names we will never know, but we get to call upon them energetically, like we don't know them cognitively, but spiritually and energetically, they're in the space and they're dying for us to speak them and to acknowledge them. So I honor the ancestors and I speak the names or the energy of the names of those whose land we stand on. I also invite you to breathe in this space. Some of us are sitting here holding your breaths. You're triggered by something that I said. You're caught up in me saying that my daughter passed away, and you're thinking, oh, how is she doing this? Or too bad for her, or I feel pity or upset. I invite you to release that right now, because I have a relationship with a daughter who lived, not a daughter who died. The death was one day. The death was one day. Her life was many, many days, and I'm grateful for that. So I invite you to engage the breath, deep diaphragmatic breaths, and I will do the same as I speak to you today. I invite you to breathe. Like really, it's not just perfunctory. I really invite you to breathe. I invite you to touch your heart that's beating, because there's someone somewhere whose breath has left their body as a result of violence. There's someone somewhere whose heart is pounding because they feel like they might be killed in this moment. So because we're sitting here at ease for the most part, because I can't speak to what your reality is in the moment. Some of you might be dealing with something, illness or something that happened to you before you got here, or maybe a text message you received. However, you're breathing, and you get to choose to be in the moment despite the calamity or the catastrophe or the upset. So I invite you to touch your heart, like really invite you. Y'all are my family, please join me. Just touch your heart and acknowledge that it's beating in this space right now. My talk is about signs of life, vital signs. Some of us have experienced violence and oppression. Some of us have experienced that in our own homes. Some of us consider ourselves to be survivors and thrivers, but I'm really, really funny about the word survivor. I'm funny about that because when you declare yourself a survivor, you have to keep proving it again and again. So I invite you to look at the words we use when we're talking about signs of life and life after domestic violence. I'm not a survivor. I'm a liver, on purpose and intentional. I also recognized today, this morning, that I never really considered myself to be someone who was a victim of or a person who experienced domestic violence. But it's not true. I experienced domestic violence in my home growing up with people who were addicted to drugs and would perpetuate violence in the household. I experienced violence, sexual violence in my own household by a family friend. I experienced violence in my intimate partnerships as a teen and as I grew and went to college. I experienced domestic violence in my intimate partnership with my former husband. I also was the perpetuator of violence. With me, because of things I experienced, I walked around in life with my dukes up, my energetic dukes up. Now, I didn't have my hands up like this all the time, but emotionally and mentally and spiritually, my dukes were always up. I was always on the ready. It wasn't about flight for me or freeze for me. It was about fight for me. I'm gonna get you before you get me. So the man that I married somebody who had dukes up. And so as we laid next to each other in bed and as we engaged in intimacies and as we co-created children, which we had two, forever in the back of my mind, sometimes consciously and sometimes not, I was prepared for the fight. And sometimes I would initiate it because I will get you before you get me. Signs of life, vital signs. Once again, I ask you to breathe and to allow yourself to feel your heartbeat. Some of us who have experienced violence are in a perpetual state of holding our breaths. Yeah, we breathe, but we breathe little bits at a time. And we think we're taking deep diaphragmatic breaths, but we're really, once again, on the ready, waiting for life to knock us upside the head. And so we take small breaths because we're always waiting for the axe to fall, for the fist to swing, for the job to be lost, for the relationship to end, for someone to say something to us that might hurt our feelings. And sometimes we get to them before they get to us. Life after domestic violence is taking responsibility and ownership for this vessel that we have. Because if we're always on the ready and if we have dukes up energetically and spiritually, we create dis-ease in the body. Some of us have experienced domestic violence 20 years ago, but our pain in our bodies, the somatic experiences that we have, which is a big word for saying like what we feel physically in the body that doesn't always have a medical reasoning behind it. You know, some of the heart palpitations or the anxiety, get on the train, we feel overwhelmed. Some of the knots in our stomach, some of the overeating, like just the different things that we experience. We need to recognize that these bodies get pummeled when we refuse to do our work. So stepping away from the relationship is not enough. Going to therapy may not be enough. Sometimes we need to practice just engaging in self-care, naming what we're experiencing. I just last year started to say I'm scared because as a Black woman, it just wasn't allowed, or at least in my view. And so life after domestic violence means I get to say I'm scared. Not because there's somebody looming in the closet or in the background or the person sleeping next to me might wake up enraged and hit me, but I'm scared to negotiate life fully because I don't want to be hurt and I don't want to be diminished and I don't want to be mistreated and I don't want to be oppressed. So I openly and unapologetically say that I'm scared sometimes, and it's okay. And naming it keeps my body from experiencing dis-ease and imbalance. Paralysis. Some of us are frozen in time. So even though we're walking around alive and people are speaking to us and we're engaging in jobs and we have maybe new relationships that are healthy, that paralysis has us operating like the walking dead. You can be breathing and dead on the inside. You can be smiling and saying all the right things, pursuing the degree, you know, going out, having a good time, engaging with family, and be dead on the inside. Life after domestic violence means that you jumpstart your heart again, that you claim life, that you operate from a perspective of I'm living, not just going through the motions, not the walking dead. I consider domestic violence as a rite of passage. I run a Rite of Passage program called Be the Tree. And Be the Tree, like when you think about trees, right? They go through seasons. And you can look at a tree in the wintertime and it's like, ain't no coming back for that tree. And I use improper grammar intentionally. Ain't no coming back for that tree. Like the bark is falling off, it looks gray and dingy, there's no leaves. But wait a minute. The seasons change and then all of a sudden you see signs of life, vital signs. And you forget that underneath the tree there are roots that sometimes stretch for miles, right? And so therefore, do not ever count a tree out. Do not ever count yourselves out. Domestic violence is a rite of passage, just like the tree going through the seasons. And if you change perspective, you will recognize that that rite of passage gives you access to who you have been and who you can choose to be. Rites of passage take you from one moment of time and phase and stage of beingness to another. So even though it's painful, my daughter's death was a rite of passage. She died. First child, I have 3, lost my child, thought I was going to bury her. However, I choose to utilize that rite of passage to propel me forward. I get to speak her name. I get to talk about how she lived. I get to talk about the fact that she broke cycles. Her relationship was healthy. She had 2 healthy babies. Like she didn't perpetuate the cycle of domestic violence and addiction and hurt and pain and mental health issues that I've experienced and other family members. She broke the cycle. Signs of life. Vital signs. So as I prepare to take my seat, I want you to know that there are signs of life everywhere. If we choose to pay attention and if we really believe that there's life beyond this physical plane, that these fleshly bodies, that we're spirits having a human experience instead of the other way around, right? If we really believe that, then we can look out as persons who dealt with domestic violence, as persons who are experiencing or choose to experience life after domestic violence. We can look for signs of life. My signs of life from my daughter are numbers. Her number was 19, 333. Her numbers were 944, which was the time that she was born. Her numbers were 1219, which was her birthday. So every day, all day, I see these numbers everywhere. People on my receipts from the stores in different places. I flew to Atlanta this weekend for a wedding, and she was supposed to be with me, sitting next to me on the plane. I told you her number was 19. My seat on the plane, I didn't choose them, they chose them, was 19A and 19B. Her numbers were 333, 3, and 33. Coming back from Atlanta, my seat was 33A and her seat was 33B. The flight was 719. I'm grateful that she keeps showing me signs of life. Sisters and brothers, because brothers get abused too, look for the signs of life. Be like me. Ride the train purposefully. I'm looking for a message. When I see signs and advertisements, I'm like, what do you have for me today, my daughter? Because I know now I'm covered by an ancestor that knows me to the bone and has nothing but good wishes for me. What are your signs of life now that you've come past and moved past the domestic violence, the hurt and the pain? Or have you? Is it a badge that we wear? I was beaten, I was pummeled, I was mistreated, I was sexually abused. I can rock out with that story, but I choose signs of life, vital signs. My story propels me forward. I'm a liver and a beer and a doer, but I choose to be first, be present, be engaged, be a healer, be a survivor and a thriver, but not a survivor from a place of something's wrong, but a survivor from a place that something is mighty and awesome, and there's more to come. I'm inviting you to define yourself. Define your moments in life, even the messy ones. Some of the stuff that we experience, these signs, are hurtful and painful and toxic, but you can use them and reframe them and use them as nourishment, as an opportunity to move forward and to stand powerfully. So I speak my daughter's name, Shawnee Benton Gibson, a liver. She died one day, but she lived thousands.